How did she feel through shoot around, and do you have an update on her status for tonight?
Yeah, she just did some of the shooting. She's going to be out tonight. Again with the back-to-back. And Caitlin are back-to-back. Caitlin's going to be active tonight. AB's not, and then.
Watch Kathy Engelbert's body language during this morning's emergency press conference as we dive into another layer of our explained realities regarding this situation. The WNBA commissioner just confirmed that Stephanie White has resigned from her position, citing what the league office officially called a miscommunication regarding player medical protocols. Sounds reasonable, right? On the surface, that's defensible. Managing a franchise player's load, especially a rookie logging historic minutes while navigating a grueling back-to-back schedule, is standard operating procedure. A coach stepping down after a front office breakdown over medical disclosures seems like a clean, albeit unfortunate, administrative error. You look at the situation and think it's just a paperwork issue between the coaching staff and the medical team. But what actually happened during that disastrous 22-point blowout loss against the New York Liberty reveals something far more troubling than a simple clerical mistake or a benign precautionary resting strategy. Because the pattern of rotational decisions and minutes restrictions that we've witnessed over the last 3 weeks looked less like medical prudence and vastly more like deliberate, systematic sabotage. We have to look at the fact next to the fiction to understand the true gravity of this coaching decision. The Indiana Fever lost this game by 22 points, completely collapsing in the second half in a way that defies conventional basketball logic. The Liberty put up 34 fast break points, completely dominating the transition game and running the Fever out of their own building. They had 28 points off turnovers, capitalizing on every single disorganized offensive set. And Caitlin Clark, the absolute engine of this franchise and the primary tempo controller of the offense, recorded her worst performance metric of the entire season: 8 points, 6 turnovers, and a staggering -24 plus-minus rating. But was it really Clark's decision-making and shooting that failed on that floor? Or was it the meticulously chopped-up rotation that deliberately set her up to fail? Look at the first-half shooting percentages versus the second half. Every time Clark began to establish the pick-and-roll cadence with Aaliyah Boston, she was immediately yanked. 3 minutes in, subbed out. 4 minutes in the second quarter, subbed out. The turnover-to-momentum ratio was directly correlated to these incredibly bizarre substitutions. You cannot blame a point guard for a collapsed interior defense and chaotic transition spacing when the coach actively prevents the offensive anchor from being on the floor long enough to dictate the pace of play. Fast break points prove the tempo wasn't controlled, and interior paint points prove the defensive positioning was fundamentally disrupted by these constant lineup changes. Now listen to Clark's response after the game, standing in front of her locker. When asked about her playing time, she said, "I just have to be better when my number is called. I trust the medical staff, and I trust the coaching staff's plan. We just didn't execute as a unit." It is the textbook definition of a composed, professional answer. She is giving all the right team-first answers, absorbing the blame like a true franchise leader who refuses to throw anyone under the bus. But notice what she is not saying. Listen for what's missing from that extremely polished answer. She is not saying, "My ankle was bothering me, so I needed a breather." She is not saying, "I asked to come out because I was feeling fatigued." If she actually agreed with the coaching decision and felt physically compromised, she would have defended the decision by citing her health. She didn't. And when she mentions executing as a unit, there is a distinct edge in her tone, because execution requires consistency. Clark couldn't establish any offensive rhythm because she was artificially restricted And she knows it. She just can't say it publicly without being labeled a coach killer or a diva by a media apparatus eager to criticize her. When Clark talks about execution, what she's really describing is the fundamental inability to string together consecutive possessions to read the defense. And that continuity was destroyed by Stephanie White's rotation. Every player knows this. Clark knows this. But she gives us the professional answer. And we have to read between the lines. Think about what this specific coaching decision actually means for a rhythm-based, high-usage playmaker like Clark. Clark is not a catch-and-shoot specialist. She is not a spot-up corner threat who can seamlessly inject herself into a play cold off the bench. Her game is built on elite, high-level processing, reading defensive shells, establishing passing angles, mapping the floor, manipulating drop coverages, and building on-court chemistry with her screeners. That takes real time. It requires sustained consecutive minutes to see how defenses are adjusting their blitzes, to feel out the official's whistle, and to physically wear down the primary defender. Short spurts of 3 or 4 minutes absolutely destroy all of that. Before Clark can download the defensive scheme and counter it, she needs to actually be on the floor long enough to run the offense through multiple cycles. You can't diagnose a complex defensive trap in a 3-minute interval. You can't establish the deep-range threat that opens up the paint for your bigs in a fragmented rotation. You especially can't build team function when the primary ball handler is being yo-yoed in and out of the lineup under the guise of a phantom medical restriction. Anyone who understands basketball knows that a primary ball handler requires the flow of the game to operate at peak efficiency. Listen to Sabrina Ionescu from the Winning Locker Room talking about the Liberty's approach to the game. She said, "We just knew we had to trust our floor generals, let the game come to us, and keep our main rotation out there to weather the storm and execute our sets." The contrast is striking because that's exactly what Clark has been doing all season when given the reins. She has been weathering the storm and executing. But on this night, she wasn't allowed to do her job. The coaching decision fundamentally prevented her from doing it. Think about what Stephanie White's rotation actually meant for the Fever's ability to mirror that winning approach. The Liberty allowed their guards to play through mistakes, find their rhythm, and dictate the tempo. The Fever's coach used a hidden medical document as a weapon to artificially suppress her own star's momentum. Ionescu is inadvertently validating exactly what the Indiana Fever desperately needed, but were actively denied by their own bench. Now listen to Aaliyah Boston's full post-game answer here. You can hear it in her voice. She is visibly exasperated, exhausted, and resigned. She keeps coming back to the team's inability to control the pace. And then she says something incredibly revealing. "We were just running around out there, looking for someone to settle us down. But we couldn't get our usual rotations going." Who do you think she is referring to? Who is the generational point guard on that roster, capable of settling the offense and controlling the tempo? Caitlin Clark. But Clark wasn't available to do that because of Stephanie White's rotation. Boston's frustration isn't just about losing a basketball game. It's about knowing they had the ultimate weapon sitting on the bench in a warm-up shirt, completely healthy, but they weren't allowed to use her because of a fabricated medical directive. Boston is translating tactical failure into a coded indictment of the coaching staff. And now we hear from Stephanie White herself, and this is where the official narrative completely falls apart. She was asked directly why Clark was pulled during a 10-0 Liberty run in the third quarter. Her answer is absolute textbook coach speak, a near-perfect deflection. White says, We were just following the internal medical guidelines regarding Caitlin's minutes today to ensure her long-term health. Reasonable on the surface. But then she adds, it was a fluid situation based on how she looked out there. Wait. Stop. Think about what she just said. If it was a strict medical guideline handed down by the staff, it wouldn't be a fluid situation based on the coach's visual assessment of her play. White continues, we have to protect our players from themselves sometimes. All the right buzzwords, but none of it explains why the medical staff was reportedly completely unaware of this severe minutes restriction until the game started. The head of the medical team, Dr. Akim Lee, was seen speaking with front office personnel right after the first half. He is a man who strictly follows protocol, standing there in his seal blue medical scrubs, reportedly looking completely baffled by the substitution pattern. If the medical expert didn't order the restriction, then the coach's statement is entirely baseless. Here's the test that proves whether this official medical explanation is genuine. If this precautionary injury protocol were true, then we would expect to see a consistent application of load management. We would expect to see Clark resting for entire quarters or sitting out the second half of a back-to-back entirely, which is the standard medical approach to a lower body injury. But what we actually saw was a player being subbed in and out every 3 minutes, going cold on the bench, and then being forced to sprint back into high-intensity game action. If Lexi Hull or Kelsey Mitchell received a minor tweak, they were either rested completely or allowed to play through it with tape. They were never subjected to this bizarre rhythm-killing substitution pattern under the same stated reason. Therefore, the stated reason doesn't hold. It reveals the decision for what it really was: a targeted benching disguised as medical care that had absolutely nothing to do with player health and everything to do with ego and control. Some will say this is just conspiracy thinking, that coaches make tough decisions, medical staffs miscommunicate, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But coaching decisions should have logical explanations. If you're managing a player's load, you typically extend their rest periods between long stretches of play. You don't yank them the exact second they hit back-to-back three-pointers. That's not medical management, that's a power trip. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This was just the most extreme example, but the pattern has been there for 3 weeks. Look back at the Atlanta game where Clark was pulled during a crucial fourth-quarter stretch. Look at the Seattle game where the rotation completely disrupted the offense rather than optimized it. The pattern is the proof. One bad rotational decision could be an error in judgment. A pattern of the exact same disruptive decision producing the exact same harmful result, ending in a forced resignation, is a deliberate choice. Imagine if the NBA had handled a rookie LeBron James this way in 2003. If Paul Silas had constantly benched a healthy LeBron in the middle of crucial runs, claimed a phantom medical issue, and the league office had to step in to force a resignation because the sabotage was so blatant. If the officials had allowed him to be battered without consequence, and if the media had written endless think pieces about how LeBron just needed to trust the process while his coach actively undermined him, it would have been completely absurd then. It is absolutely absurd now, because the parallel is exact. Caitlin Clark is to the WNBA right now what LeBron James was to the NBA in 2003, and her own head coach was treating the league's golden asset like a disruptive bench warmer who needed to be taught a lesson. Clark's performance in that New York game was statistically her worst, but it wasn't her fault. You cannot judge a generational playmaker's performance when they're not given a fair, consistent opportunity to actually perform. It's like asking a Cy Young starting pitcher to pitch one out every inning. sit in the dugout for 20 minutes, and then go back out cold to face the cleanup hitter. No professional athlete can produce under those deliberately chaotic conditions. And here's what makes this even more frustrating: how Clark handled it publicly. She didn't throw Stephanie White under the bus. She didn't complain about her minutes to the press. She talked about team execution and taking accountability. Meanwhile, Aaliyah Boston's comments revealed the real exasperation in that locker room. The undeniable sense that they had the solution sitting right there on the sideline, but they weren't allowed to deploy it. The WNBA has a highly complicated relationship with Caitlin Clark. On one hand, Clark has been incredibly lucrative for business metrics, driving unprecedented ratings, merchandise sales, and sold-out arenas across the country. On the other hand, Clark has violently disrupted the established hierarchy of the league. She is a rookie guard who immediately became the absolute center of the basketball universe, and that has made a lot of veteran coaches, established players, and traditional media members incredibly uncomfortable. But here's the thing: that's not Clark's fault. She didn't ask for the toxic discourse or the resentment. She just plays elite basketball. The league should be protecting and elevating this unprecedented momentum. Instead, we're seeing what looks like active systemic resistance. From overly physical targeting on the floor by veterans, to media members undermining her impact, to her own coach allegedly hiding medical evaluations to justify benching her. This specific coaching decision in the Liberty game wasn't just a bad night of basketball. It was highly symbolic of a much larger, darker problem. The WNBA has spent 25 years begging for mainstream relevance and explosive growth. Now, they finally have it, delivered on a silver platter by number 22. And the response from some internal corners has been to actively try to put the genie back in the bottle. Stephanie White's resignation today wasn't just about a medical miscommunication. It was symbolic of a larger institutional failure. The league has spent decades wanting the exact cultural relevance that this star has delivered. Now they finally have it, and rather than embracing the shift, the response has been to artificially restrict it. Some will still try to say this is just an isolated coaching disagreement. But the internal consistency test result regarding the medical protocol says otherwise. The 3-week pattern of disruptive substitutions says otherwise. What Clark deliberately didn't say at the podium says otherwise. If Stephanie White truly believed her official explanation, fine. But the specific pattern of targeted benchings tells a completely different story. And until the Indiana front office can explain why their medical staff was allegedly kept in the dark about a minute's restriction, fans have every single right to ask whether Caitlin Clark is getting a fair, honest chance to succeed in an environment that sometimes seems more interested in protecting egos. Watch Kathy Engelbert's body language during this morning's emergency press conference as we dive into another layer of our explained realities regarding this situation. The WNBA commissioner just confirmed that Stephanie White has resigned from her position, citing what the league office officially called a miscommunication regarding player medical protocols. Sounds reasonable, right? On the surface, that's defensible. Managing a franchise player's load, especially a rookie logging historic minutes while navigating a grueling back-to-back schedule, is standard operating procedure. A coach stepping down after a front office breakdown over medical disclosures seems like a clean, albeit unfortunate, administrative error. You look at the situation and think it's just a paperwork issue between the coaching staff and the medical team. But what actually happened during that disastrous 22-point blowout loss against the New York Liberty reveals something far more troubling than a simple clerical mistake or a benign precautionary resting strategy. Because the pattern of rotational decisions and minutes restrictions that we've witnessed over the last 3 weeks looked less like medical prudence and vastly more like deliberate, systematic sabotage. We have to look at the fact next to the fiction to understand the true gravity of this coaching decision. The Indiana Fever lost this game by 22 points.